So as our chiefs are arriving in the room, I'd like to welcome Major General Michel Frenling, the French space commander. Sir, you joined the military in 1986 as a pilot. You served the first part of your career in fighter units, flying first on Mirage F1s, then on Mirage 2000s. Mostly stationed in the north of France, in Cambrai, you deployed several times to Africa, the Balkans, and the Middle East. You count more than 2,400 flying hours and 71 war missions. You commanded at all levels. To highlight it, but some of them, you commanded a squadron at squadron level in Mont-de-Marsan, preparing the arrival of the Rafale, commanded at group level with the command of Saint-Dizier at the moment where the France was involved in Libya, and you commanded at command level with the Space Command. You also served several tours in HQs, and have notably worked on the National Strategy Review and on plans. Finally, you hold a degree in aeronautics from the French Air Force Academy, graduated from the War College, and read at the SHEM and IHEDN. Sir, thank you for your presence today. Looking forward to hearing from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. It's like on the stage, I can't see anybody, so it's very comfortable. So when I was asked to participate in this symposium, I was very embarrassed, actually, because we are talking about air and space power, and actually we don't have any definition of the space power, and that was the reason why I was very embarrassed. And you won't find any definition or even mention of space power in the French space defense strategy. So this is probably a question we should, or you should, address in this symposium, what space power is. And the Americans, they have a definition, and I found it in the Chief of Space Operations, John Raymond, in his guidance. And actually, when I looked at it, I saw that we could take this definition with any problem, because it's a very good definition, and it suits very well to the French views about this. So, and the other thing is, when I prepared this speech, I was wondering whether I could show on the slide some kind of joke to break the ice, and my intent was to put a slide with different characters and give you a kind of riddle and say who's going to be the most powerful person in space over the next 15 or 20 years. And the persons I would have put on the pictures would have been Joe Biden, okay, that guy. Xi Jinping, that guy. Yoda, you know, Master Yoda in Star Wars, this guy. Or Steve Carell, the actor playing the chief of the Space Force in the series of Netflix, who is a kind of weird guy, but funny and actually powerful. Or Elon Musk. And actually the question is real. Who's going to be, apart, of course, from Yoda or Steve Carell, who's going to be the next most powerful guy in space? And this is mostly my first part. So to be more serious, it's a great honor to me, of course, and at the same time a challenge to be here in front of such an audience. And I would like to give you some insights and consideration on the space domain, the path that we have drawn and that we are now following in France. And I would first like to give you some background elements on the space domain. its importance, its challenges, and the great upheaval of the global space ecosystem over the past 10 years. Then I will explain France's response to this global context in terms of ambition, capabilities, organization, and I will take then the opportunity to give you an update on the ongoing ramp-up of the space domain and the space command in France. And I will conclude with general thoughts, some of them especially dedicated for airmen, air chiefs, and air forces. So first of all, space. What is it about and what's going on up there? Over the last 10 years, the space landscape has faced a radical upheaval. The number of countries involved in space has risen from around 30 to 85 today. Direct financial expenses have doubled from 36 to more than $80 billion, as well as the military investments in space capability over the last 10 years. And in a few years, the number of operational satellites has more than doubled. When I took this position in 2018, I used to say that there were 1,700 satellites, active satellites in space. And they are now, 3 years later, more than almost 4,000. So you can see this is a very fast growing number of satellites. And in 2020, last year then, almost 1,300 satellites were put into orbit, 10 times more than less than 10 years ago. And we expect more than 20,000 potentially in the next 10 years. So you can see the figures are really striking. New actors have appeared. Elon Musk, for example. He was pretty much a joke in the space industry in the middle of the 2000s. Today he is one of the most innovative players and one of the most feared actors in the space industry. He has verticalized space capabilities and space industry ranging from launch, starting from launch, but ranging from launch to broadband communications, including satellites manufacturing and their deployment, not to mention the human flights that the Americans had subcontracted to the Russians since the end of the space shuttles. And Elon Musk could be soon the largest space actor in the world. And you know, his big competitor is not NASA, is Jeff Bezos. He could be the second one. 10 years ago, nobody was talking about the moon anymore. And you know perfectly that today, this is a strategic objective for the US and for the Chinese, and not only for them, for many other countries, even for Europe. Until recently, no one envisioned exploiting celestial bodies like planets or asteroids, but today commercial agreements are discussed to allow, and even signed for some of them, to allow and develop these activities. Some private companies try to build business models to do that. China is the fast rising power in space. Since 2000, China has multiplied its spending, military spending, by 8, from less than $1 billion to a little more than $7 billion a year. And it has multiplied by 3 its annual launches. Last year, China was the first launching power in space, with 39 launches against 37 for the US, 15 for Russia, and 7 for Europe. China has a very ambitious program to the moon, and the Chinese flag is already planted on the lunar soil. And the first Chinese astronauts arrived last Thursday, last week, in the new Chinese space station. China is now looking for international cooperation, as International Space Station, ISS, should be deorbited in the mid-2000s, in the mid-20s, sorry, the next 5 years. Finally, we can see the emergence of a very dynamic Chinese private sector with ambitions and objectives very similar to those of the American GAFAMs. For example, the Chinese submitted to the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, end of last year, a request revealing plans to construct low Earth orbit constellations very similar to the one of Musk and Bezos, with a total of around 13,000 satellites. Second point in this background, the crucial importance of space for human activities and economy. It's a reality today. Space irrigates all areas of human activity: infrastructure, agriculture, environment, energy, finance, health, mobility, defense, security, and so on and so on. A study published by the European Commission 3 years ago has also shown that 11 economic sectors of the Union were depending on space services for a contribution to European GDP of almost 900 billion euros. And some estimate in the US that the space economy should be around $3,000 billion in 2040 versus around 400 billions today, including the downstream markets, emerging areas like space tourism, in-orbit services, space debris removal, exploitation of the mineral resources of the celestial bodies, or digital services. So it is no coincidence that the GAFAMs, the American GAFAMs, are positioning themselves as key players in the space economy. Microsoft and Starlink provide broadband internet and global cloud computing service across space infrastructure. And Amazon Web Services wants to do the same with the Kuiper constellation of Jeff Bezos. Third point for the background, risks and threats. In outer space, we face a significant increase of worrying events and emerging threats. And I don't even speak about risks like debris. We have today more than 30,000 debris of more than 10 centimeters and 900,000 debris of more than 1 centimeter. Just talking about threats. First threat is a cyber threat. An opponent could attempt to gain control or neutralize a platform by attacking its ground-based segments or by breaking into the exchanges between the two. You have also a wide array of spy satellites that can perform jamming, signal interception, or seek to locate users of military or commercial telecommunication satellites. There are also lasers used from the ground to space, for example, to dazzle an observation satellite. We saw that in the past. We'll also see the appearance of satellites capable of approaching very close to other satellites, performing what we call RPOs for rendezvous and proximity operations. Several countries and private operators are developing these techniques which have commercial applications such as inspection, maintenance, or debris removal, but which can also have military applications. And finally, we have the most spectacular threat, the missile fired from the ground to destroy a satellite in low Earth orbit. Three countries have demonstrated this capability since 2007. And I can tell the number of worrying real-world events, space events of that kind, that we have been tracking over the last 3 years has been steadily increasing. and this is of a great concern. This is the background. So, what is the French answer to this background, to this statement? In 2010, a dedicated department pretentiously called Joint Space Command was created by bringing together the functions dedicated to space, to the conduct of space programs and military space policy. This department, which was actually a department from the Joint Space Staff, this department was also responsible for coordinating the actions of the various military space stakeholders, in particular those of the Air Force and the Intel Directorate. And we, as military, we know that coordinating is different from commanding. In 2017, our strategic review introduced something new: the recognition of outer space as a possible area of confrontation. The same year, our multi-annual programming law for 2019-2025 devoted significant money for the renewal of space capabilities in support of military operations, that is to say, secured SATCOMs, Earth observation, and eavesdropping capabilities and integration of dual-mode reception devices for PNT signals in all land, sea, and air platforms. But in July 2018, the French President, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, gave a clear political impetus. He said space was a national security issue, and he called for the development of a national defense space strategy. This work was carried out for a year under the direction of the Ministry of the Armed Forces, Mrs. Florence Parly, and it ended in July 2019 with the publication of this strategy. So what does it say? So I would like here to recall the main elements of the strategy. It's based on a statement that I described in my first part. It therefore recognizes the space domain as a specific domain with its specificities, particularities, the fifth after the land, sea, air, and cyber domains. And the strategy aims at strengthening our strategic autonomy, and it also aims at ensuring our freedom of access and action in space. So how to do that? Along three main directions. First, we must face emerging threats by defending our space interests and developing our space surveillance capability, which is the backbone to do that. Second, we need to benefit from the opportunities brought by the new space, what we call the new space. And third, we want to broaden cooperations in the field of military space operations, and we want to open it up to new partners. Our roadmap is structured around four axes. First axis, a new doctrine of military operations in space with an emphasis on space surveillance and the new mission: protect and defend our space interests, knowing that our space interests are not only French satellites. Second axis, a new capability ambition consistent with this doctrine. Third axis, a larger space expertise in the French MOD, specifically by attractive career path and by a space defense academy. And fourth axis, a new organization within the MOD by creating a dedicated space command and by revisiting the relationship between the MOD and the French Space Agency called the CNES. So what is the French Space Command? Allow me to give some words about this command. It was created in September 2019. The Space Command, CDE, carries and embodies under the double authority of the Chief of the Defense Staff and the Chief of the Chief of Staff of the Air and Space Force, General Lavigne, the implementation of the Space Defense Strategy. The objective of the creation of this command was to improve operational efficiency, consistency, visibility, and simplicity of our organization. The idea was to bring together in a single organization the responsibilities or some responsibilities and to the maximum extent possible resources to exercise these responsibilities. It is a very unique command for two main reasons. First, it is a command of the Air and Space Force, but it is a tri-services command, and I do have in my people guys from the Navy and the Army. Second, it is the only command within the French MOD with such a comprehensive field of missions. We deal with the military space policy, that is to say, capability development for space, international cooperations, and international legal works about the space domain and all aspects related to this. It's also an operational command, and thus it conducts military space operations and exercises operational control of military space platforms and military capabilities under the authority of the Chief of Defense Staff, like any other operational command in France. And finally, it is an organic command in charge of organization, training, and combat readiness under the authority of the Chief of Staff of the Air and Space Force. This mix of responsibilities is very efficient, in my opinion, and we work together with General Lavigne to achieve this, unique and very singular, specific formula in the Ministry of Defense during the space review between summer 2018 and summer 2019. It gives a great deal of efficiency and makes it possible to better embody and carry the strategy within and outside the Ministry of Defense. It has only a major drawback. It is a permanent balancing act between many players and many shareholders. And you notice that I do have a double authority, joint of defense staff and the Chief of the Air and Space Force. And I often say that I am constantly walking on a ridge line and that a misstep is possible at any time. But I also often say that this unusual formula in the Ministry of Defense must be proven by deeds, by acts, and I think, indeed, it's the case after 2 years. So we are on the right way. So where are we now? As I said, Space Command was created 2 years ago, and after nearly 2 years of hard work, I can tell that we have been moving forward a lot. We work in total synergy with the French Space Agency, the CNES, which is our first partner for capabilities and operations, and which is gradually transferring know-hows and techniques and responsibilities to us as we grow. We had 220 people when we were created. We now bring together almost 260 specialists, today spread over 4 different locations. But by 2025, the CDE will be mainly based in Toulouse, at the heart of the French center of gravity of the center of gravity of the French space ecosystem, with the largest number of space companies, from big companies to startups, and probably the largest space ecosystem in Europe. In new buildings, incorporating a space innovation lab dedicated to innovation in the space domain, taking benefits from the new space ecosystem, an education and training center for military space operations, and a comprehensive space operations center. I will come back on this. The workforce growth will continue each year with increases of around 40-50 people a year until 2025 to reach around 500 people by 2025. This and the generation of space expertise are one of the most challenging issues that I face for the standing up of the CDE, and this is a real concern for the Air and Space Force, and Philippe Lavigne is fully supporting this growth, and the French Air and Space Force provides nearly 95% of the CDE's overall workforce, and almost all of the growth every year. The generation of skills is based on three complementary axes. Generalist education organized by the CDE for the benefit of the MOD, but also for the benefit of other ministries and organizations. And the number of attendees is constantly increasing every year. Second, transfers of, and I mentioned that already, transfers of operational and technical skills by the CNES on very specific field. In 2 years, the first military experts which will have been trained in terms of space operations being the core capability, and this number is growing every year. And third, space military exercises like Global Sentinel, Shriver Wargame, and the French Asterix exercise recently conducted in France, and that we will extend to European, NATO, and strategic partners next year. Capability developments. Over the next 5 years, we will have renewed all of our existing space capabilities supporting the other domains and the military operations. This is about SATCOMs, ISR, eavesdropping, and PNT terminals. For the control of outer space, which includes space surveillance, and to be more specific, space domain awareness, which is the word that now we use, and active defense of space capabilities, we have defined and launched an ambitious overall program called ERIS. This is a huge challenge. The main objective is to detect, track, and characterize any object of military interest 24/7 and to attribute any hostile or unfriendly behavior in space. The second goal is to be able to prevent and discourage, some would say deter, any unfriendly or hostile act in space. And to do this, we want to implement capabilities covering the entire spectrum, offering a wide range of options in order to be able to act continuously, flexible, and proportionate, in particular facing an adversary who would act below the threshold of armed conflict. We also want to have a command, control, computing, and communications capability for military space operations. This will be the backbone of all our future capabilities, which will no longer operate in silos, but in a global and coordinated system, failing to be interconnected at first, in total synergy and interoperability with external actors, and taking into account the specific dynamics of the space environments, but also the huge growing number of objects in orbit. And finally, the challenge for this will therefore be the ability to collect considerable masses of heterogeneous data, to store them, to structure them, to certify, to process, to transform them into useful information according to several levels of confidentiality. AI will play an essential and central role, as well as simulation and most certainly blockchain technology. Cooperations. France is indeed seeking to develop and share a common vision of the strategic challenges in space, in particular about threats and responsible behaviors in space. To this end, we are developing a number of cooperations and partnerships in bilateral or multilateral frameworks. And these cooperations are capably based or all operational. So with regard to Europe, our defense space strategy clearly states that France supports the development of space within Europe so that Europe can be capable of contributing directly to the construction of its own defense and security. Europe knows how to build ambitious projects. Galileo and Copernicus are the perfect examples. So we must also be able to grasp European cooperation opportunities that could arise shortly in a rapidly moving environment, and there are some ideas on the table. Operational cooperations, they involve operating or preparing to operate in the space domain with our allies in an environment that is new and largely unknown from a military perspective. We need a common understanding, consistency, and interoperability while framing our doctrine to operate in space. The discussions we have in various bilateral and multilateral commitments give us very interesting feedback and avenues for thoughts that help us to progress more quickly. A word about NATO. In June 2019, NATO established the overarching space policy, which then led to the declaration of space as an operational domain for NATO in December 2019. In Brussels, last 14th of June, NATO recognized the growing importance of space for the security and prosperity of nations and for NATO's deterrence and defense. NATO then considered that, in the final declaration, NATO considered that attacks to, from, or within space present a clear challenge to the security of the alliance and could be as harmful to modern societies as a conventional attack. And such attacks could lead to the invocation of Article 5. And this is a huge and very new and very huge step for NATO. So France wants to be a front row player in the space domain within NATO. This is the reason why we were candidates last year to set up and host a space center of excellence in France, and that we are proud and honored to be in charge of establishing this center now. This project is a major investment for France, proportional to our ambition for NATO and space. Synergies will be extraordinarily strong with the French Space Command and all the space ecosystem located in Toulouse. It's also a token of the attachments that we have to the alliance. Fully open to all allies, it will be leading pool of space expertise for NATO. We truly believe this collective project will allow the alliance to fully pursue its ambition for space, and we don't want it to be just fancy, but we want it to be efficient and productive. So it's time for me to conclude now. This, with a few ideas and sum up. The sustainability of our space activities and security of our space infrastructures, and along them our prosperity, our sustainable development, and our collective security are at stake if space is not secured. We strongly believe that the right to self-defense is allowed in space as well as in any other domain, and NATO, since Brussels, recognizes this as well. Having a space defense is therefore essential to maintain our strategic autonomy, our freedom of action in space, and most importantly, to discourage anyone to conduct irresponsible actions in space. At the same time, France is continuing its diplomatic efforts with all the nations who want to promote and guarantee a peaceful use of space. For example, we fully supported the UK initiative of norms, rules and principles of responsible behavior last December in the UN. As I said previously, space is a specific domain with its physical and legal specificities, particularities, and its own logics. The character of war is fundamentally unique compared in space, is fundamentally unique compared to other domains. And it requires other systems, other tactics, other doctrines, other know-hows, other capabilities. But throughout history, and in most countries, aviators, airmen, and air forces have always been more than interested in space, sometimes even pioneers. The third dimension is in their DNA and in their culture. The speed of mobiles in transparent environments is something they know and love. Command and control culture, fast operation cycles, real time. We also do know and love all of this. Air forces do have an essential role to play to develop space capabilities. The connection of the air domain and the space domain, two distinct and specific domains, is a challenge for all air forces in the world, at the same time that it is necessary to guarantee the provision of services to other services in operations, Army, Navy, for example. The space capabilities remaining the most critical enabler of modern and future military operations. And this is a little bit different of the integration of the 5 domains in multi-domain operations. I think we do have the 2 issues to deal with. So my conclusion would be to encourage all air forces to think about the best way to benefit from this unique positioning I mentioned, while ensuring proper consideration of the specificities of the space domain. A combined approach between air and space will facilitate any future efficient multi-domain culture and doctrine. And this is almost a blank page that we have to write. A difficult but exciting challenge. Thank you very much for your very kind attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your insights. I think it is now time to split the room for those who have meetings before we get started with Roundtable 5, the first roundtable of this morning. So for the first roundtable this morning, roundtable 5, we will focus on air power and space control coordination and other C2 aspects. To discuss this question, we have the honor to welcome on stage distinguished military experts from Sweden, France, Spain, the UK, and Italy. The moderator for the panel is Mr. Justin Bronk, who is joining us online due to sanitary restrictions. Mr. Justin Bronk is a research fellow for air power and technology at the Royal United Service Institute, better known as RUSI, from the UK. Mr. Bronk is also editor of the RUSI Defense System online journal. His particular areas of expertise include the modern combat air environment, Russian and Chinese ground-based air defenses, and fast jet capabilities, unmanned combat aerial vehicles, and novel weapon technology. He has written extensively for RUSI and a variety of external publications, as well as appearing regularly in the international media. Passionate about air power, he is considered by many a rising expert of the topic. I personally already consider him as such. Justin, over to you for this roundtable and the presentation of your panel.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be joining you, and apologies for not being able to travel to Paris in person, hopefully soon. So without further ado, I wanted to put a particular spin on this question of Air C2, particularly in a contested environment. So looking at the scenario in which most air forces, of course, procure and design their fast jet capabilities for. After all, no one can look at something like an F-35 or an F-16 even, or a Typhoon, and not see something which is designed to fight against a peer opponent with the highest level of capability in the highest threat environments. And indeed, the capabilities from KAOX through to fast jets, through weapon systems, which air forces procure, are paying a huge premium in terms of cost and therefore limited numbers in order to have the capability to fight in that really high-end contested environment. But as we've heard over the past couple of days, a huge amount of what the air power instrument is actually used for day to day is in the much more responsive but lower threat level, lower permanence level of operation. So what I've kind of tasked the extremely esteemed speakers on this roundtable with today is to look at the scenario in which air power is having to operate on the defensive, where there is a level of threat to both platforms and potentially C2 hubs and logistics, and that the alliance is having to gear up to fight at a significantly higher level on perhaps a different tempo, and a tempo where the enemy is dictating a large amount of the pace of operations. Whereas for a lot of the sort of intervention operations and coin support operations that we've seen over the past 20 years, it's been very much air power's gift to dictate the tempo of operations and the time and place. So yeah, with that in mind, we're going to first hear from the Chief of the Swedish Air Force, Major General Edström. Sweden, of course, being a country which has its own total defense concept and a rather unique within sort of NATO and NATO partners alliance. It's, of course, external to NATO, but it's unique in that it has a fairly strong focus on particularly the threat from Russia, and so it looks more in a more focused way, perhaps, at the high-intensity, high-threat defensive scenario. We'll then move to Brigadier General Pavlos G, who will discuss the operational C2 implications of a move from an air policing posture towards an air defense posture. He has particular experience, of course, within the Typhoon force, so very experienced in the air policing piece, and the view to how you would have to change personnel, arrangements, currency, and of course force posture in a sort of defensive scenario, I think will be fascinating from him. We'll hear again from Group Captain Dickens, who spoke yesterday from the RAF, He'll discuss some of the doctrinal implications of a move to air operations under threat. And then from Colonel Bess from the French Air Force to talk about some of the multi-domain operations concept work being undertaken by teams that he's a part of in Air Defense and Operations Command. And last but absolutely not least, we'll hear from Colonel Galgani from the Italian Air Staff, looking at the effects on the critical space domain of a more threatened and contested operational scenario. Without further ado, I'll let you look at their bios in the conference packs, because we've got a lot to cover. So without further ado, if Major General Edstrom, would like to start, that would be great. I'll hand over to you, sir.
Thank you, Justin, and good morning to you all. I will try to keep it short and crisp to leave times for questions and also discussions afterward. But as you said, Justin, I will try to give a kind of a high north perspective on this question and this roundtable discussions also, and the Swedish view. What I can say is, historically, the last 30 years of European interventions have been focused on peace enforcement and stabilization operations. And today, as we had said, the world has changed, and the European cooperations, both within the EU and NATO, as well as in a broader European context, is since 2014 more about resurgent great powers. A future European intervention may be, as we had said this last 2 days, against a peer adversary who has attacked a European country. And this poses a very different set of challenges than we have been dealing with in, for example, Afghanistan, Iraq, and similar theaters the last couple of decades. So looking at our operational context from a high north perspective, we can see an increased proliferation of long-range precision weapons like the SS-26 Iskander and the Caliber cruise missile. And also connected to this, that the time cycle of finding to attacking a target has been and is continually reduced through the use of everything from space sensors to small airpass and drones. And another growing threat to all operations is, of course, the continuing evolution of cyber warfare. Having said that, assets on the ground are also still vulnerable, of course, to special forces attacks. Probably even more so today in a gray zone scenario that we see happening in different countries for the moment just now. And of course, we still have the traditional threat from strike aircraft and bomber aircraft to take care of. But the big difference then, today compared to the previous decades, is that an intervention against a peer adversary who has attacked a European country, then we would be reactive. We would no longer own the time and the place as we are used to. And we will face a very capable air threat to a degree that we haven't seen over the last 30 years of European operations. And one of the foundation of air power, protecting and the protection of your own bases, would be challenged when our basis is within strike reach of the adversary's air assets. Of course, control of the air would also be contested. And the space services that we grow even more reliant on would also be threatened in this scenario. So this is a context that I think we need as a European family plan for, and that frames how we look on tempo, availability, and coordination. So looking into Sweden, despite threats against our bases, we have to maintain asset availability and sortie generation while protecting our aircraft from being destroyed on the ground. In the Swedish Air Force, we facilitate this through dispersal and constant movement within and between bases. The larger challenges is, however, then against command and control when, if not, C2 system are attacked by the adversary. And this could be both by kinetic or by cyber means. So to mitigate the threat in the Swedish Air Force, we focus on building a command structure and an Air Force culture which embraces initiative and innovation. If our C2 is disrupted, we can fall back on my commander's intent, known already in peacetime, as well as prepared playbooks, so that my subordinates feel confident in acting according to my intent and to take necessary initiatives. This way, we create redundancy levels, which will make it possible to maintain a higher tempo than an aggressor, even though we started out being reactive. We also see that early coordination and planning together with our partners already in peacetime is a key element in being able to quickly regain an operational tempo after the initial attack. The bigger question is, however, then how do we achieve something similar that I've been talking now about, which we are doing now in the Swedish Air Force, within the frame of a multinational European intervention? And having said that, I would also like to open up a discussion also with the panel later on about new capabilities and bringing in new capabilities and technologies, which we need to do. Don't take me wrong here. I'm a big advocate for being on the front of technology innovation, but we need to also to understand that bringing in new capabilities, technologies, at the same time we are bringing in vulnerabilities for ourselves. For one example is the balance between this, what we have been talking about this week, those very attractive combat cloud and big data solutions and connectivity, which will certainly help the operational tempo when and if it's available and redundant. But we need to ask ourselves also, what do you do if you can't download all the data needed in the new Gripen, for me, the Gripen system, for the next generation fighters? What do? Your availability will be lower, and therefore your tempo will be lower if you can't solve this. I have no answer on this question that I have said now, but I know that we need to address these kind of questions with open eyes and also together within the European space and air power family. Thank you very much. That was my short introduction.
Thank you, General. And if we could just go, in that case, straight on to Brigadier General Pawlowski.
So, Air Chief, General Officers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the organization of the conference for the great work done already, and especially for the opportunity to taking part in this Roundtable 5 together with my colleagues here, aimed at the discussion on RC2 structures. My contribution is going to be a short one, hopefully, just intended to trigger the discussion on the quick transition from peacetime to crisis or conflict, setting up the scene by introducing some thoughts and some ideas. Nowadays, air and space forces are even more important than they were in the past, as key elements in the effective contribution to security and defense, due to the higher and higher importance of air and space with regards to Europeans' citizens' wellness. Furthermore, within the security and defense arena, the capabilities offered by air and space power are essential in crisis or conflict situations. This is nothing but a well-known truth. However, it is of utmost importance to highlight it whenever we, airmen, have the opportunity to do so. The reason why this is necessary is because we are all dealing with increasing economic difficulties, with a decrease in the availability of resources in a quite contested scenario against the rest of the services, mainly our sisters, land and maritime forces. The fundamental beauty of air and space capabilities is twofold. Firstly, air and space power is the key enabler, if not the main actor, in the achievement of the necessary freedom of movement. Secondly, air and space power guarantees a credible deterrence and the potential to quickly react by offering a wide range of different options to cope with any emergency situation, including the possibility of choosing a graduated response against the arising threat at the right time and at the right place, while at the same time collateral damage is minimized, the risk to our armed forces is reduced, and the logistic footprint is decreased to the maximum extent possible. However, in order to ensure that the air domain is able to swiftly respond to such challenges in an effective manner, there is a need for an equally agile and flexible air command and control structure. RC2 elements should be responsible for all phases across the build-up of the crisis, supporting the transition from peacetime to combat and back to peacetime operations once the end state is achieved. In this light, the RC2 will perform the command and control of air capabilities to enhance initial situational awareness for indication and warnings, monitoring, and to support the assessment of the developing situation and its potential or actual implications, contributing to the development of recommended response options to guide political decision-making, performing contingency planning, mission execution control, and post-mission analysis. All of those will be responsibilities under the RC2 element remit as well. Taking into account that the crisis situation could range from a very limited regional problem to a humanitarian crisis or a large-scale conflict, the RC2 elements have to be scalable and tailored to the mission. But above all, lessons learned from the past highlight the need for an improved synchronization with the political and strategic level in order to have the right procedures to quickly stand up the air command and control structure, allowing the transition from peacetime operations to crisis or conflict, or even in a quite complex scenario where national or European security and defense is at stake, transiting from air policing to air defense. The takeover from the National Air Operations Center to the Joint Force Component Command need a consolidated precautionary system with the right precautionary measures in place to allow the standing up of the RC2 element immediately once the political decision has been made. Again, that JFAC will be responsible for the command and control of a range of missions in circumstances that, in many cases, will be difficult to predict, since, to some extent, every crisis is unique. Initially, there could be a need for augmentation of tactical air units and airlift capabilities by military tactical or strategic transport aircraft, together with associated air enablers like air-to-air refueling and personnel recovery assets, plus ISR capabilities, persistent ISR through RPIs, maritime surveillance, etc. However, a JFAC HQ cannot be improvised. The seamless transition from peacetime operations to crisis rely on resources and robust processes that need to be assured during peacetime. There is a clear need for a suitable infrastructure in a permanent location ideally with an alternate location as well. That infrastructure should be able for the allocation of the rather high numbers of personnel involved in a JFAT HQ and the associated CIS equipment needed. The latest has to be robust in order to provide resilience and has to be deployable to the maximum extent possible in order to support the command and control of the units whenever they are not operating from their main operating bases. Finally, the CIS needs to be interoperable whenever the manpower populating the JFAC is not only national, but is obtained by augmentation from abroad. There is also a need for already elaborated contingency plans at the base to quickly build up specific operating plans for immediate execution. However, and above all, what is paramount is the availability of certified personnel for each and every position of the JFAC HQ who have been properly identified, have gone through the appropriate individual and collective training, and have maintained their qualification by participating in frequent and recurrent CPX exercises. So, after reviewing the list of requirements to quickly stand up an RC2 element able to exercise air command and control in the emerging threat scenario, the arising question is, do our European nations have that C2 capability? I will leave the question in the air without answer for you to think about it. However, I would like to introduce a reflection quite related to it. Some of our system European land services, for any reason, have been able to establish, during peacetime, multinational operational land HQs. Eurocorp is a perfect example of this. Maybe it is time for our air forces to assess this type of solutions for the European command and control in the air domain. Yes, no doubt that manpower-wise, it is a burden that we have so far avoided due to the systemic situation of reduced personnel we are suffering. Yes, that lack of personnel is why we, the air forces, have avoided setting up operational HQs during peacetime, where no operations are in place to be commanded and controlled. However, a Euro-JFAC could be the right solution to accomplish peacetime prudent air contingency planning for EU operations and to accomplish the enterprise to seamlessly transiting to crisis if the situation requires it. In addition to this, Euro-JFAT could also be the already in place solution for the demands of air command and control of current European operations like, for example, EUTM Mali and others. Furthermore, JFAC training could also be an area of responsibility for this HQ. The Euro-JFAT concept has the potential of various beauties and qualities, like bringing agility and responsiveness to the RC2, and as such providing deterrence, being adaptable to the operational needs, bringing enhanced multinational interoperability, and allowing for smaller nations contributions. With the latest food for thought, I would like to conclude my intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General. Yeah, without further ado, Group Captain Dickens, if you'd like to take the floor, please do.
Thank you very much. I'd like to approach answering this question by reflecting on some of the outcomes of our integrated operating concept from last year, and also talk about some of the changes that have been put in place since then. We spoke yesterday about our perspective on threat, but the outcome of the integrated operating concept really recognised that we're in a persistent competition, and this demands a step change from an episodic mindset to one of persistent campaigning and engagement, increasingly controlled at the strategic level. So what does that mean for the UK? The biggest thing for us is our focus on research and development. We're spending 6.6 billion over the next 4 years to try and regain some of the advantage we think we've lost to our competitors. We're focused on integrating. We spoke yesterday about doing that not only horizontally but also vertically across government with allies and partners. It sees us moving beyond joint or comprehensive. We must be the sum of our parts is what is the conclusions of the operating concept, and now we need to bring that into life. And the integration is not just within defence, but the cross-government elements with our partners in the security services is vital to us. From a UK perspective, we also believe we need to be more assertive. We need to demonstrate our will and our capability to reset deterrence. Lethal and non-lethal capabilities need to be employed, and we want to confront threats earlier before they become a major problem. We spoke yesterday about agile combat employment and dynamic force employment and how they have the possibility to act as a deterrent to our potential aggressors, but we need to present potential adversaries with multiple dilemmas. All of this must be information-led. We have to invest in the capabilities to obtain and exploit information at speed. There is also a change in mindset from the UK about persistent engagement overseas. Previously, we were withdrawing slightly from Europe. We're now going to move back forward. We also need to develop new capabilities with partners, and we can see that in places like Bahrain. This enables us to preempt and manage crises before they escalate, minimizing opportunities for states and non-state actors to undermine international security. The other aspect we need to consider is making sure that we demonstrate a sustained commitment to allies and partners, rather than the intermittent ad hoc approach we may have taken in the past. There is also a focus within the UK about homeland resilience. This has also included modernisation of our nuclear deterrent. In terms of command and control, we've focused working across 5 partners on something called Joint All-Domain Command and Control. This project seeks to address primarily through a lens of technical interoperability, but also the project is looking to align across the 5 IS nations all of our concepts, training plans, policy, data standards, and exercise and experimentation opportunities. And we hope this technical interoperability will allow us to control in this new domains, and it will also allow us to increase pace as we go forward. In questions, we can talk about some supporting projects to what we call JADC2, but we have another program called Information Advantage, which is about how we get the data to the decision maker at speed. We've got combat clouds, and all those things are being developed through our Rapid Capability Office. To allow time for questions, that's all I've got to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for keeping to time. So if we move to Colonel Bess, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And yeah, please also feel free in the audience to text through your questions using the links in the delegate packs provided.
Thank you, Justin. Sir, gentlemen, ladies, and dear friends, aviators, I would like to give you a quick insight on how we are approaching in the French Air Force, because it's very much based on our C2 culture and our military culture as well. Our approach to multi-domain operations and multi-domain C2. It's a work in progress, as well, pretty much in all our air forces. Why air forces? Why the Air Force? Well, because in France, the French Air Force has been the first to publish a concept about multi-domain operations that has consequences almost at the strategic level, encompassing the operational level as well. Next slide, please. Well, I'm going to start this presentation with an Army quote. Battlefield commands. That was what I was taught at the Joint War College by an Army colonel. Battlefield commands. Well, the aim of this presentation, and pretty much the conclusion of our work about multi-domain operations and multi-domain C2, is battle space decides, which is totally different. It decides how we integrate our actions to obtain the results and the effects we want to apply on enemy's system of systems. Well, first thing I think we can agree on is that peacetime does not exist anymore. So we have to envisage actions, we have to envisage C2 before the threshold of conflictuality. We have to open C2 to to a real interagency approach to command and control, and that has huge consequences in terms of policies, national policy, and we are working on this at the moment. Battlefield commands, battle space decides. Well, what is the battle space today? What are we putting into this name? So we like coming up with fancy names, and then we don't know exactly what is behind this. Well, this very difficult drawing to understand is how we are pretty much organized today. We are in a very Westerner mindset. We draw lines on maps and we decide that we have JOAs, and in these JOAs we exert command and control and ROEs apply, and outside of these JOAs it's another business, and it's on the laps of another commander. Well, the fact is that today all our GOAs are connected one way or the other, because our adversaries are not organized in compliance with the limits we draw on the maps. They are just organized in systems of systems, and these systems of systems are pretty much exercising their C2 all over the place, all over the planet, between JOAs, for instance, between Syria and Sahel. There are connections. We don't know, we don't understand all of those connections, but we know that there are some. And we have to make up our mind to understand that C2 has to apply within those JOAs. We do this pretty well. It has to apply between those JOAs in what we call lacunar spaces, where there's nothing at the moment, but where there will be something to do in time and space, most of the time without notice, and we will have to rely on one of the entities, national entities, that is able to generate C2 in those lacunar spaces. Looking at this slide, you can see a big blue, light blue rectangle with a space, cyber, and air. Why? Because rezoning on battle space, we quickly realized that there's another community of the ring, and air C2 is switching from regular component tactical level C2 to a community that has a lot in common with space and cyber. Global considerations of the battle space on the effects that can apply from one JOA to the other and everywhere in between. That's why we started to consider air C2 as something else than it used to be. We are not talking levels of command, but responsibilities in terms of integration. In this concept, we came up to the conclusion that, next slide please, that at some point the vertical relationships, command relationships between vertical orders descending and reports climbing up the chain were generating too many delays to be able to adapt our C2 and decision making to adversaries that are more and more organized in a different way that does not comply with our Westerner mindset. Like the Chinese koi fish, we have to swim and find the easiest way in against the stream, in the easiest way in our adversaries' systems of systems. That implies not only acting as we used to do, generate action, generate effects, but we have to switch in terms of C2, well, tactical level air C2, we have to switch from generating effects to integrating effects, because at some point our decision making collectively will have to be shared between this vertical system that we are used to, very hierarchical system, complemented by direct relationships between tactical C2s, between domain C2s, cyber, space, air, land and maritime, considering that cyber, air and space have a lot to do together. What is it based on? Well, it's pretty much based on establishing something else. Today we are still trying to establish a positive force balance, force ratio. We are counting assets, counting bombs and impacts and PDA, and we are making ratios, and we are trying to obtain a 1:3, a 1:4, a 5:1, which is has a big advantage. It's fairly easy to do. We add numbers, figures, and we obtain a number that we usually paint with a nice color. We have to ask ourselves how it does represent how we handle the battle space. How are we able to grasp the problem in its as a whole and act on it? We came up to the conclusion that force ratio is not representing today the complexity of what has to be done in a complex environment. So we came up, next slide please. We established other criteria. What gives us the freedom of maneuver and the whole capability to act on the systems of the enemy? Well, first of all, access that is more and more frequently denied or made difficult to us through A2AD in different ways that I want to discuss here. Knowledge, we have to understand, we have to consider the model of systems to be understood and identify what we already are supposed to do today, but we don't do it very well, the adversary critical capabilities and vulnerabilities. So that, like the koi fish, we find the easiest way, the less painful way, and the less costly way to swim in these systems. Knowledge, as I said. Effector's capabilities, that is already taken into account, and the consequences of our actions on our operational design, that is to say on our initial intent. That has to be updated on a permanent basis through an aggressive and predictive assessment. That is not the case today. Why do we do this? Because we want to detect and manage and exploit opportunities. We want to identify the factors that we have to act upon to create those opportunities in the systems of the enemy. Keeping in mind that we have to stay connected to our initial intent, which is the political and strategic objective. So we don't act on what we can, but we act on what we have to. Which is already the case today, but it's very tempting when the situation is complex to do what you can do and not what you have to do. Next slide. So the takeaway, it's in several minutes. It's quite difficult to sum all this up, but what is going to have consequences on the way as countries, on the way we are going to cooperate together? Not interoperability. Technical interoperability is a small part of the issue. It's an important part, but it's not sufficient. Plugging things into walls and computers does not make a C2. We have to understand that as an air C2, a former tactical level C2, we have to be able to raise one level above to integrate effects throughout a community of C2s, of domain C2s, cyber, space, whoever. We have to integrate effects. That is the role today of the operational level, and that questions to what extent an operational level, a dedicated level of command to operational integration is still required in multi-domain operations. That was quite short. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I'm sure if we had a representative from the US Air Force here, we would also hear an enormous amount of similar thoughts around multi-domain integration, command and control, but perhaps with a different slant, since the US Navy would claim that it's been doing multi-domain command, control and operations for many years. And the US Air Force is gearing up to change the way it fights completely for the challenges of the Pacific, but perhaps something to get into in questions if people are interested. Without further ado, I'd like to move across to our last but not least speaker, Colonel Gorgani from the Italian Air Force.
Yes, sir, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, do you read loud and clear? Do you read me, Justin? Okay?
Yep, reading your vibes.
I'm very pleased to be here today. Unfortunately, only via teleconference was not possible to me to join physically. But I'm very pleased, and my congratulations to the conference team, because it's a very interesting event, and thanks for the invitation. I will also ask to share the screen because I have a presentation. Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So, in coordination with the moderator, I got the task to present a topic regarding the space domain, the frame of a contested operational scenario with a possible confrontation against a near-peer competitor. I will try to underline the main issues related to this theme, considering that I have a short time to present this challenging topic. This is the agenda of my presentation. I will try to make a short summary of space-based services and their main characteristics in the frame of a complex multi-domain operational scenario that I will highlight, including space operations itself, meaning satellites operation, and the need for a space domain awareness to fight a modern war. First of all, let's look at this picture. Actually, this picture was presented yesterday already by my colleague Colin Zampella during the third roundtable, but it is instrumental to me to introduce the space domain. In the figure, the space domain is depicted above all the others. Besides the fact that space is located outside the atmosphere, so physically above everything, we can agree that on the fact that space-based products and services are today essential for all military and civilian activities, much more than in past years. And it's not speaking about only enabling domain, because we have also to consider all space operations, meaning, for instance, satellite operations to guarantee the services. Some concepts have been already mentioned by our keynote speaker, Major Frederick, but I will reinforce that. Just a brief introduction. When I was piloting my fighter aircraft a long time ago in the late 90s, I was flying with a pure inertial navigation system, planning to drop down bombs and looking for the target using my 50,000 map. So, I mean, the time has changed. Today, a 5th gen aircraft most probably cannot even take off without a valid GPS signal. So, in a modern confrontation with a near-peer competitor that has got space capability, the unrestricted access to space services for the coalition, like SATCOM, PNT, or Earth observation for ISR and targeting, is more than ever fundamental. Finally, as I mentioned, space is not only related to space services, but we need to consider also all space operations, including, for example, all space maneuvers needed to be done and operate these services. I will not go deep details about this slide. It is just a synthetic summary of space-based capabilities with a particular mention of advantages, disadvantages, and vulnerabilities of services provided by satellites. I want just to underline that today, both safety and security in space is really a big challenge due to the presence of a great number of space objects in all the operational orbits. In fact, nowadays, the space is congested by a great number of space debris, including inoperative satellites, estimating a number of like 34,000 objects greater than 10 centimeters and more than 900,000 from 1 to 10 centimeters. Impressive numbers. It is really a safety issue for all operative satellites, and we cannot forget the space weather effects on satellites and on space services. Furthermore, space is also a competitive and contested environment, also considering that current international laws and regulation needs for sure some changes in consideration of the technological progress of the last 50 years. Currently, with the Western technological advantage really reduced to a minimum if you consider the space capabilities reached by nations like Russia and China, underlining that Russia and China has got ready the technological capability to carry a threat to Western space assets and services from the space to the space. In this slide, I want to underline that besides any possible attack conducted from the space, for sure to be considered and to be countered to protect our satellites, in case of a confrontation, it will be more simple and effective to attack the element of the ground segment or to the user segment, also considering that a cyber attack could cause a complete failure of a satellite ground control station. In addition, I would like to highlight that in case of an hypothetical attack to a satellite system from the space, it could not be simple initially to understand if the lost service has been caused by a failure or by an attack or by space weather. Furthermore, before reacting, especially if we are in a phase transition from crisis to war, an accountability process will need to be accomplished to give evidences about the hostile act. This is valid also in case of a cyber attack, since it is very difficult to get evidence that behind that cyber attack there is an issue. So, considering the space is a congested, competitive, and a contested environment, any spacefaring nation, in order to operate its own satellites and to guarantee safety and security of those assets, needs to monitor the outer space with accurate space surveillance and tracking sensors, radars, and optical telescopes. Also, the space weather needs to be monitored, since a solar storm could create waves of energy capable not only to disrupt space services, but also to damage satellite devices. Furthermore, possible satellite maneuver accomplished by a possible opponent must be monitored, and there is the need to know what kind of capabilities got the satellite of the possible opponent, in order to operate a defensive maneuver to safeguard our own satellites in case of a cozy maneuver accomplished by our enemy. The above mentioned capabilities, space relation and tracking, space weather, and space intelligence are the three pillars of the space relation awareness capability. So, finally, I think that there is a need of a full understanding and monitor of the space environment with a 360 degrees approach in order to remain inside the ODA loop of the possible near-peer opponents. So in the space domain and the space operational planning, our campaign goals must be to guarantee and unrestricted space access to the coalition and at the same time deny as much as possible the space access to our adversary. Let's now speak about a little bit about the space resiliency concept. As you know, we have to try to increase our redundancies and our resiliency, especially for our space assets. For instance, the space system robustness by design is one, I think, pillar. If you consider, for instance, the Galileo PRS system, that is a very robust system against the jamming and spoofing by design. Another pillar is the redundancy, both in the space segment, but also and especially in the ground and user segment. If you have only one center that is controlling your assets, your satellites, could be just a missile or a ballistic missile or a ground attack by SOF to disable your entire net of satellite and services. SSA capability, worldwide coverage, yes, because if you have a sensor just over you, you can control your sky, but there is a need to cover as much as possible the globe to monitor 24 hours a day the upper atmosphere and the space. So the mutual support and cooperation is paramount, and one example of federation of sensors is the USST consortium. It's a civilian initiative, but it's a very good example of federating sensors, either radar or telescopes, to monitor the sky. Finally, this option should be considered. Responsive launch of microsatellites to quick replace lost services. You know that to plan and to conduct a standard launch in the space is very long and costly. I think that we should consider develop systems to use like air launch capability by, for instance, a large body aircraft with the system to launch microsatellites to quick replace a lost service. So a microsatellite only for SATCOM, microsatellite only for Earth observation. These systems are much less costly of a huge satellite and can have also a life that is shorter, but just to replace instantly, a very quick, a service lost. So finally, coming to the conclusion, we had a quick overview on all these themes from space advancement and vulnerabilities, the services that we need, the threats and to the safety and to the security, the need of a space situation awareness capability to reach and space domain awareness, and some space basic concept. Let me now present you a statement. It's not mine. It was presented in a JAPCC conference a few years ago. Since the JAPCC conference are run by the Chatham rules, I cannot say the name of the speaker, but I really concur with this statement. Winning the war in the space will most probably lead to win the military campaign against the peer-near-peer adversary. Losing the war in the space will almost surely lead to defeat, and I'm really convinced about that. With this, I end my presentation and I'm ready for discussion.
Thank you very much, Carl. And I really, really like that last slide. It's a great image. I mean, abusing chair's privilege just at the beginning, to get one question in. I'm aware that, of course, you never ask what's the biggest vulnerability or what's the biggest kind of shortfall, because it's a way of asking things that is unlikely to get an answer from officials who are bound by the political conventions of the services in which they represent. However, if I could ask the panel for their personal view of, if they were given a significant chunk of additional funding for their particular service, and the brief was specifically to use it as you saw best to improve the capability of your particular area of service to fight a peer or near-peer competitor in a contested scenario, where would they, what's their first thought on where they would really like to have some additional resilience or some additional capacity or some additional capability? So perhaps Major General Edstrom, if you want to take the longest time to think about that, given you are the chief of your service. But yeah, if any of the panelists have an instinctive reaction of where they would put additional funding were it to be given specifically for a peer or near peer scenario, that would be quite interesting, I think.
Okay, should I start then? Go off on that question. Okay, thank you very much. To start out, we have been talking about that also. What's the most important mission for air forces and air power? That's the control of the air. So that would be within that mission. I would put the money. And controlling air, it's a system of systems. You need to work together. You need, of course, the fighter units in the air to be functional with the fighters and the weapon systems. You need fighter controllers, the radar sensors, and also for us, as I was talking about, the air-based concept. And for us, it's a dispersed concept. So for the Swedish Air Force, and for my question, I would actually put it in two areas. One would be to increase the radar chain, radar sensors, both when it comes to ground-based radars, mobile radars, and also airborne radars, because that's very, very important for us. And the second would be actually on the logistical chain for our air bases. to be able to have the right weapons, the right fuel, and on the right pace and the right time. You need a very big organization and a very strong organization. So I would put it in these two areas.
So I don't know if I am the one that has to follow answer this, but I fully concur with the Air Chief for sure. First, what we want is to see money. This is the very first thing that we want. But just our primary mission is air policing, so we need to keep our capabilities up to date. And one of those is the radars, for sure, the surveillance system. It is something that we have to worry about. Even more if we are transiting to this civilian traffic, where everything is going to be collaborate, and we have to be able to have the picture whenever we finally have something that is not collaborating to the air traffic system, and or that air traffic system falls down. So it is quite important. And secondly, for sure, is manpower. In our Air Force, we are very worried about manpower, and I think that what we need is to expand a little bit. We have suffered a huge reduce in manpower, and if you have good personnel, experienced personnel, trained personnel, finally you will get everything afterwards. So that's my thoughts so far.
Thank you, sir. Well, I would go for something that encompasses both of your answers. A permanent educated C2 structure, which is the way to consolidate our requirements, our needs, and express our requirements and vulnerabilities. Other than that, if we buy stuff, if we buy musical instruments and we don't have the conductor, then the result will be very disappointing. So yes, permanent educated C2, which means professional C2 and not people that at some point of their career end up in C2 because, well, they like it or they're interested or they are good at nothing else. But no, dedicated C2, real careers in C2, and structures, permanent structures to put this into motion.
I would echo the responses of the previous speakers, but I'd also reflect on the purpose of defence. If we're there to protect the people and our national interests, I'd want to invest in combat mass, because we can't be in two places at the same time if we only have one piece of equipment, and that's something where I'd want to spend the money.
Yeah, I just add some thoughts. For sure, I mean, if you speak about the space systems, you really need a large amount of money to develop capabilities. So sometimes to have a mutual support to share the capabilities could be an option. And sometimes you can, for instance, previous was talking about radars. When you talk about radars for air defense, probably now technology permits also to have radars with a coverage also to the lower orbits, LEO, so you can have a radar that is monitoring both airspace till 20 kilometers, but also higher, so you can have the sense, that sensor with a dual use. And yes, I mean, for sure the Air Force needs to accomplish its mission, but without the space services, most probably be very difficult to do that in the virtual remote. Another thought was a speaking about the air traffic control, civilian control with all the CSAR program that they are going on. That sometimes I would say that is limiting the military activity. Watch out, because Europe now is moving very fast in speaking about the space traffic management concept. That is very far from now, because actually also the rules and international laws cannot permit to develop that topic, because I mean, while in our national airspace we can rule, for the space there is no international rule that permits that at the moment. But watch out, because the civilian part, the European Commission is moving very fast, also thinking about investment for commercial space flight. So I think that the military part of the house should monitor and collaborate and coordinate much more than now. That is my thought about this theme. And this I conclude my speech.
Thank you. We had a question from the audience and the public for specifically Colonel Bess and Group Captain Dickens. Whether there were any lessons that you could share from Operation Hamilton, so specifically the French, UK, US combined attack on chemical weapons targets in Syria in April 2018. In terms of the lessons that you want to share for C2 requirements, operational C2 and perhaps tactical C2 requirements when dealing with a complex attack against an air defense equipped adversary.
Well, air defense is an air defense well-equipped adversary has to be considered as just a system in a system of systems. The air defense can be dealt with in many different ways, and as I said during my small presentation, we have to find a way to swim, to swim against the stream, to overcome this in the less painful way. Integrate our effects against an integrated air defense system that is powerful and that denies us access to a significant area in the operational environment has to be dealt with in a global manner, starting with all the means that maximize our survivability. And I will start by space, cyber, and find the weak points, the vulnerabilities of the system of system. Avoid the strength of these systems of systems. Do not confront them, because that's what they are good at, responding to direct attack. So we have to find an indirect approach to this, which means multi-domain approach, which means allocate a portion effect to the best suited effector, which might not be in this case SIAD or whatever, but most likely indirect approach to this complex system of system.
Okay, thank you very much, and I totally agree with you. And but I have one reflection also when it comes to, we're talking about A2AD bubbles, the problem of coping with that, and we, as you said, this need to be a multi-domain concept to counter this, but we need also to be able to do it now with what we have here and today, because we can't just wait for new capabilities and new techniques to arrive to cope with the threat. So you need to do it in both looking for building capabilities, building new techniques, technologies in the future to cope with this, but also using training and exercises to actually change your TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, because there are some way. I'm really sure about this, that you will find ways of actually coping and being able to handle that kind of threat and that environment in addressing the techniques, the tactics, and procedures, and make changes there.
If I could offer just how successful that operation was. If you think about combined activity with the US, the French, and the UK, it highlighted the importance of training regularly together. It highlighted the importance of shared doctrine interoperability across the platforms. We also needed to look carefully at the consequence management before the activity, and that messaging then across the international community to make sure that we reset deterrence and the red lines associated with the use of chemical weapons. So I think it was a good operation for understanding the lessons of how to work with partners.
Thank you. And while there are a couple of other questions, I'm afraid I've moderated the questions badly, and mea culpa on that. Thank you to all of our speakers. We are coming to the end of the session. It's been, I think, a fascinating debate. The questions that I'm certainly left with as an interested outsider would be around a lot of topics such as particularly munition stockpiles and the amount of dispersed basing that is prepared and ready to use, but which probably can't be answered, particularly at the classification level of this forum. So thank you so much for the speakers, and I hope the audience enjoys the rest of the day and a short break while we reset for the next panel. Take care.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you for our panelists for this rich discussion. And as Justin said, we're going to all take a break and get back to our seats and on TV for us watching us online at 11:20. Meanwhile, we will have some videos to share with you. Thank you.
It's a profession that starts with an A. A is for airplane, A is for aerial, and A is for aeronautics. But also, A is for Clément Ader, for aviators, for all those who, over the past 150 years, have turned the dream of flight into a reality. A is also for achievement. Today, the aeronautics sector employs 194,000 people in France, a strong economic force focused on international horizons. An industry built on knowledge and expertise from both large established corporations and small innovative companies working hand in hand. And so, A is for ambition, because tomorrow, even more so than today, humans are opening up to the world, moving and coming closer to one another, and airplanes will carry them there. On air with an I. I is for Icarus, of course. I is for intelligence, and I is for innovation. Because innovative advances in research and development are at the basic foundations of the French aviation and aerospace industry. Because for over 50 years, the biggest successes in the sector are a result of innovation. Every year, the French aeronautic industry files several thousand patents and invests over 1 billion euros in production equipment. And finally, on air with an R. R is for responsibility, because French aeronautic companies are fully aware of their social and environmental responsibilities. This is why the industry pays careful attention to security and safety. This is why it invests in new territories where it supports high-tech industry and develops skill sets that are essential to its future. This is why it launches programs that will help reduce even more the impact of air travel on the environment, protecting resources and creating an aeronautic industry that respects our planet and the people who live on it.
May I invite the audience to take a seat and the panelists to come on stage, please? All right, so back from the break. We're going to get started while people are taking their seats in the room. We are now down to Roundtable 6, which is intending to address the question of the necessary adaptation of procurement and industrial processes to the field reality. As that has been the case, the increasing pace of technological innovation over the past decades rendered these yet old questions even more acute. To discuss it, we invited experts from the military, the French Procurement Agency, and industry, namely our partners Ariane Group, Safran, and Thales. Dr. Edouard Simon will introduce them and moderate their discussion. So, Dr. Simon, you are Senior Fellow at the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs, IRIS, in Paris, specialized in matters relating to European security and defense issues, as well as industrial policy issues, notably for the armed sector. Before joining IRIS, you were director of the Brussels office of the European think tank Confrontation Europe. You have also previously worked for 4 years at legal departments of a big group and took part in the creation of a team dedicated to EU law, competition policy, and legal lobbying. You hold a PhD in European Union law from Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne University, having defended your thesis entitled Roles and Functions of EU Law in the Integration of Arms Acquisition Policies. Dr. Simon, I interest you to present your panel and give you the floor.
Please, gentlemen. Thank you so much for this introduction and this very exhaustive presentation. Thank you. I would like maybe to start this fascinating discussion about the implication of the acceleration. My apologies. The implications of the acceleration of innovation cycles by maybe two common places. The first common place is that the acceleration of innovation cycle does not concern primarily defense, but it also concerns defense. More and more technologies have been discovered for commercial purposes this last decade and outside of the traditional defense innovation ecosystem. This trend, we all know it, is set to last as you all know, GAFAM research, development and innovation budget largely surpass military innovation military innovation budget, and especially European ones. The second common place I would like to refer to introduce this panel is that this acceleration also concerns defense and is set to deeply transform the situation, the system, the defense innovation processes, the articulation between shorter and shorter cycles of innovation and long-term armaments which are set to last over decades is not an easy question. It can also deeply change the situation on the battlefield, where the race to innovation is increasingly becoming a part, certainly only a part of military supremacy, and it's probably even more true when it comes to air and space supremacy. So maybe what is less a commonplace, what is actually a pretty hot issue, and what is still an open question really, is the way that this acceleration can be handled in the most efficient and the most effective way from labs to battlefields. And this question, it's at the very heart of our of the focus of this conference on the synchronization of different tempos, strategic tempo, operational tempo, but also industrial tempo, innovation tempo, etc. And this is precisely the question that this panel will explore today, and so to offer some clarity on such a complex issue, I'm very proud to be surrounded by such distinguished experts and stakeholders. Just to introduce briefly the speakers of this panel, first I would like to introduce Major General Philippe Lavigne. You are the head of the Military Capability Planning Division at the Joint Staff. You have been the head of this division since 2020. General Marco Vian, you're the Deputy Director of Operation at the French Procurement and Innovation Agency, the DGA, since 2022. Amiral Duché, after a military career in the French Navy, you have been the military advisor to the CEO of Ariane Group since 2019. Frédéric Mazanti, you're Executive VP, the Director of the Defense Division at Safran Defense Electronic and Defense, sorry, from 10 years, I believe, and you joined this company in 1983, so you pretty much know everything about Safran Defense Electronics and Defense and the defense industry. And Pierre Fossier, you're Vice President, Chief Technical Officer at Thales Land and Air System Global Business Unit. You have been working in the aeronautical and defense industry for approximately 35 years, I believe. So I'm really surrounded by great experts of the subject that we are going to explore today. And first, I would like to turn to General Lavigne. As you are the end user of this innovation that you are going to talk about, and in this panel, you are also the one with the most directly confronted to the question of the contribution of innovation to military supremacy on the battlefield. So, General, I get that your needs, especially at the architect of capability coherence, are evolving facing this acceleration of innovations, processes and cycles. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this trend concretely changed for you from an operational point of view, from a military point of view, and what kind of challenges it triggers for you?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for qualifying me as an expert as the rest of the panel. It's a bit challenging at first. But yes, to come back to your question, of course, at the beginning was the operational need. For that, and without expanding too much, of course, I just need to turn back to the vision of General Lecointre, our Joint Chief of Staff, of course, who called when he took office 4 years ago for the French forces to be strong, modern, assuming a leading role in Europe, agile, and connected with the rest of the world. So this is really the target. And if you look at the opposite side, of course, you will understand exactly all what we need, what is not present in our capabilities, of course. Of course, man is at the center of everything, but we are talking a lot about equipment also and capabilities in general in terms of technical means of conducting wars. What I can see about the field reality is that there is a growing need for resilience, of course, in very general terms. So that's a big change, but there's also, as you mentioned, an acceleration of everything, and we need to take in many, many things. Of course, I will not expand on that, but everybody can witness the increase of threat everywhere in the world, and the way we have to adjust as quickly as we can to new ways of conducting war. So the wars are changing, and we need to adapt, of course. It will be difficult to change the war according to what we have, of course, and we need to adapt. In practical terms, and in my daily job, I'm expected to take in many different constraints or new parameters, of course. The first is automation. Automation is everywhere. But at the same time, and we discussed that before the panel, we need to assess risks and control them. We need to maintain a technological superiority. Of course, that's our operational advantage rests a lot on technological superiority. And because we are in a fast-changing world, we can see that every day with our smartphones and what our children can do, and we are completely unable to understand. We need to make the best of the digital transformation of the society. And I am expected to make sure that military capabilities are evolving as fast as your apps on your smartphone, which is a real challenge, I can tell you. When I turn to procurement processes, of course, the difficulty is always the same with all those new constraints and this acceleration, but the basics are still there. We need to justify from the past wars what we need for the future ones in terms of quality and quantity, of course. We need to make sure that we don't miss any opportunity in terms of technologies or anything else. We need, of course, to make sure that any superiority that we may have now is maintained in the future. We need to make sure that what we are procuring in terms of new equipment is not creating new vulnerabilities, which is in a digital world is very challenging, obviously. And we have, in the end, to balance our requirements with economic realities, which means funding. If we see that and we try to draw any conclusions from that, of course, there's one obvious one, is that we need more partnerships, more or better ones. That means partnership between states, but also with industry. We need to bring in better value for money in our capacities. And for that, we have to take into account market sizes, development costs, interoperability, and all those constraints that I did not develop. In reality, partnerships is probably one of the greater challenges we have to face after this digital transformation, because let's face it, defense industry is still a national industry. There's a lot of competition between nations on defense industry, of course, and this is very national. It's a sovereignty problem. And partnerships, even if it's national, tend to bring in lots of extra difficulties, in fact. It's not a client-provider relationship anymore, but it brings additional difficulties which translate most of the time in terms of delays and additional costs. And I'm not talking about final discrepancies in the product we are procuring. So that's really a problem, but we are determined to continue and to progress in that matter. We must believe we can do better, and I'm sure we can. General Lecointre, again, is a great believer in the necessity for our nations to acknowledge a military singularity. The military world is not exactly the civilian world, and we have to make sure that everybody understands the difference, and that could justify some exceptions in terms of procurement. That's my conviction in a way. Just as a word of conclusion, if you know the joke where the origin of most of your computer problems are probably located somewhere between the keyboard and the back of your chair, we have to ask ourselves if our processes issues are probably not more than just us, in fact. So yeah, we need to adapt, not only the processes, but maybe the way we think, and we need to make sure that our culture evolves in the right direction.
Thank you so much, General. and thank you for having stuck to the 5 minutes I granted you. Very appreciable. I would like now to focus on the question of industrial dynamics, because the needs are evolving, but I mean the processes, the dynamics of industry are evolving too. And first, I would like to turn to Frédéric Mazanti from Safran Electronics and Defense. Mr. Mazanti, you are heading the defense branch of an enterprise which is evolving both on defense and civilian markets. And so you are directly confronted to this challenge I was mentioning earlier, the one to find synergies between civilian and defense innovation. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more what exactly this acceleration of innovation cycles outside of the traditional defense ecosystems change for your activities as an industrial?
Okay, thank you very much. I have been involved in the defense industry for 38 years, and I have seen many change in this industry. What I would like to say is not a pessimistic message, but a very positive and optimistic one. And I think that the future will be brilliant for all of us and all our industry. First of all, I don't want to speak about all the market. I want to speak of the market I know. It is a market of a tier one company like Safran Electronics and Defense. Safran Electronics and Defense is involved and mastered two key technology, inertial navigation system, optronics system, critical software, and our customers are Ariane Group, Airbus, Dassault Aviation, or other prime company all around the world. When we are a tier one company, in fact, you are in competition against a multitude of other tier one companies, and you have to stay at the state of the art every time. The civil and the defense market are completely different, and there is a lot of synergy between both of them. What we have live, the semiconductor technology, thanks to the Moore law, everybody knows, has dramatically accelerated the progress and the miniaturization of the technology. And due to that, in fact, today the technology has been democratized, and the access to the technology is much more easier than in the past. But in parallel, the cost of research and development have been multiplied by perhaps 10. And the cost, the price of the product have been divided by 5 or 10. And so we are obliged, if you want to keep the growth a company needs to survive, we have to multiply by the same ratio, the production and the market. And so we have to find a new way to develop the product and to sustain our research and development, and to give to all our brilliant engineers the job they want to have. So I can give you another example. The US DoD, Department of Defense, for instance, has a budget of, I don't know, in 2019 it was something like $720 billion. And despite a so huge budget, they cannot compete against the Titan, the giant company of the GAFAM. For instance, they have been obliged to give to Microsoft a program. I think that they got in Microsoft $2 billion, something like that, to enhance a helmet dedicated for the gamers at the beginning for a soldier application. So this illustrates that the civil market is perhaps sometimes today the first before the military market. However, I think that solutions exist to stay a world player And I can give you one example. We have to develop, if you want to stay a world player, you have to find an asset which need, of course, a lot of money, but also a lot of time to master it. It is a case, for instance, for a sensor. A sensor like a gyroscope or an infrared sensor, if you want to develop it, even if you have a huge amount of money at your disposal, you need decades to develop it. And nobody can develop it and master it if you don't invest a lot of time in the past. But like I say at the beginning, the miniaturization of the product has a consequence on the price. In Safran, Electronic and Defense, we say, you know, price, I know, Mark, perhaps you don't believe me, but the price and the weight of a product is the same parameter. Believe me, it is true. So to compensate this lower price, we need the volume. For instance, if you have a sensor which is small enough, if it is affordable, and if it is versatile, you can try to propose it for some application you have not imagined in the past. For instance, today we have developed a gyroscope which uses the Foucault pendulum effect, named the hemispherical resonator gyro, the HRG. And this gyroscope is able to be used as well as an aircraft, a combat aircraft, or a nuclear submarine, or on board the next Ariane 6 booster. But it is also used it will be also used in the next years by the US soldier, because tomorrow you know that the GPS is less and less available in the operation due to the jammer, and thanks to this new technology, the US soldier, and I hope in the next year also the French soldier or the European one, will be able to keep a very precise and available position despite the jam of the GPS. So I think that the technology we have developed, if we take care to develop and to have an actual asset in front of the competition, we can develop a lot of systems, a lot of products which permit in the future to enhance the performances of our system, to enhance the affordability of the product, and to enhance also the domain of operation of the product of the future. So I think that this model can be applied in many cases. And last but not least, I have two things to add. Of course, I have spoken about the military application, but like you have said, all these new products are fully available for the civil market, and of course, both markets have to be addressed by this kind of technology, and both markets give money and capability to the others. And the last thing is we have to keep in mind, I think, is I want to thank the French government and the French DGA, because all this new development would not have been available today if at the beginning the French DGA has not given us an opportunity to launch this development. When we speak about sovereignty, when we speak about such high level of technology, at the beginning, we need an help in order to launch this kind of technology. And after that, we have to be sustainable by ourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mazzanti, for this very useful panorama and which perfectly set the scene and the industrial scene. And I would like to keep on exploring this industrial dynamics and maybe to focus on more focused issue. And I will turn now to Pierre Fossier from Thales. And Mr. Fossier, I understand that you are confronted at Thales to a direct consequence of the digital revolution that was evoked by Major General Adam, the loosening of the links between software and hardware. And what does it change concretely in the way you manage your innovation, in the way you manage your manufacturing process, and maybe also in the relationship that you have with your customer and with the end user of this innovation?
Yeah, thank you very much. Effectively, the idea I would like to develop is I called it disadherence between software and hardware. So don't be afraid, because you're familiar with this. When you're at home, you're used to buying new PCs while keeping the benefits of what you've done in software. And conversely, you have upgrade of software every time, and it doesn't bother you. I mean, so in the IT world is something that is well known. It comes also to our digital telephones, where constantly we have upgrades, and we're familiar with this. And my point here is that this disadherence is knocking in the door of the military systems, okay? And we're going to see that that has two consequences and a set of questions, and that's what I want to develop. So why is it available to the military world? It's because I think we see how we can manage the non-functional constraint like safety and security. It's in our hands, not exactly tomorrow, to be honest, but in a couple of years, I think that'll be achievable. And therefore, we begin to speak about cloud combat cloud, and edge processing, all right? I'm not going to say we're going to make war with public clouds. I'm not saying that. But we can bring all these technologies and have the benefit of this transformation. So I talked about two consequences. First of those is operational consequence. That increases dramatically flexibility in the way we can implement our military doctrines. You can select where you're going to implement the processing of a sensor, either in the combat platform or in a remote carrier or in a standoff platform, if that standoff platform has more computing power. And you can dynamically orchestrate. If you lose connectivity, have fallback plans. So it opens up an ocean of possibilities to serve the operational benefit, and in particular the acceleration of the combat loop, as we all know. So that's how we're gonna implement the collaborative combat. Now, it gives a second advantage is how we can adapt the doctrines, how you can adapt, because industry is not gonna do that, but I happen to have worked in electronic warfare. I know what is all the first evening of the first day of war. I mean, if the pilots go to sleep a little bit, the electronic warfare operators don't, because they have to change. So the capacity to adapt to the threat, to be resilient, to implement those combat doctrine, change them, is a possibility offered by that change. The US claim they have changed live the software of a combat aircraft while in flight. All right. Actually, they admit, if you dig a little bit, they admit it's not for the safety critical part of it, it's more for the mission system, but they've done it. So that's the operational consequence. What about the next one, which is a programmatic consequence? If you want to do that, what does it mean? It means you can shorten the innovation cycle. That operational innovation that I talked before must translate into a practical shortening of the innovation cycle. You could imagine functional improvement decorrelated from the hardware changes. To be clear, in France we have standards, as we call them. is it the end of the standards? Could we change things independently from the big change of the hardware platforms? That creates a new question. To take a non-European example, the Canadian Navy wants to change their collaborative combat systems on their ship in less than 1 week. All right. The second programmatic consequence is that it requires to adapt the methods of working between industry, procurement, and forces. We have to work together. I know it's a bit of a lieu commun, as we say, but to go to this agile development, to go to these DevSecOps. DevOps mean we develop and we see directly in the operational world whether it works or it does not. We can't do that without the forces. Okay, we do not own the doctrine, but when we implement software changes, we need to know with the forces. All right. So it calls for some sort of intimacy between the three components of which are industry, procurement agency, and the military forces. All right. Then to conclude, some questions that it raises. 4 of them, actually. The first one is that there is a need to be able to validate before we implement these new software changes that calls for sort of digital twin benches on the ground, because are we going to say in one night, this is a new software? Somebody will say, how do we test it? All right. So, for example, on the Typhoon team have said they want to replicate the aircraft, the digital twin of the aircraft, so that they can validate upstream beforehand all the new software releases that they want to do. All right. So, in other words, from the industry standpoint, it means that we have to go to the procurement agency and discuss with them on how we can develop benches to validate those new strategies. Second consequence, second question, ability of the man in the loop to own these changes. If I'm a pilot aircraft, hopefully for everybody I'm not, but let's suppose I am. I'm taking off and I said, don't worry, the software has been changed. Okay, but what's my role? How do I appropriate that? Do I understand the thing? And it takes time for man in the loop to appropriate the doctrine. So that requires improving the training of our people, improving the training, shortening it, being able to be as agile as what the industry can provide. Third question, I talked about this triptych between industry, procurement, and Air Force. Intimacy, I said. Is it compatible with competition? My colleague from DG will answer for that. I have an answer, actually, but that's a true question. It goes up to IP questions as well. So it's an unexpected consequence of the digital transformation, but we need to address it. And last is that question on the European scene, okay? And we see that with CAF. This triptych must be aligned between the different countries. Do we have an agreement between the procurement agencies? Obviously, yes, because we are about to launch a program. Do we have an agreement between industry? We're working on it. Do we have an agreement between the forces? Sorry, forgive me. That's a question I'll let to you. It's a matter of what is the European sovereignty with regard to the national sovereignty. And an example I'm working on medium-range weapon system, we have a core doctrine and separate national instantiation. So you see on the 3 lines of work, there is a collective work to be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fossier. And thank you for facilitating my job and for formulating so clearly such questions. Yeah, thank you so much. And I will give the floor in a minute to the customer of this panel. But just before, I would like to turn to Admiral Duché from Ariane Group. And Admiral, you have been one of the end users of innovation in your previous life, in your life as a military. And now you're working for a major manufacturer in the defense industry, but in a very specific industry, space industry. It's specific space because, well, it's almost 100% dual use. So the synergies between civilian and defense innovations are there and are explored, and it's also particular because for several years now, space industry has been enduring a deep transformation because notably of the development, of the formidable development of what we used to call new space. I learned that it's not new space anymore, it's next space or something like that. But so I would have a double question. Is there a space specificity when it comes to the handling of this innovation and this implication of innovation? And what can we learn from the space industry that could be useful for the future of the defense industry in the way we handle innovation?
Good question. Thank you. As you maybe know, Ariane Group is in charge of both the civilian launches, Ariane 5 and Ariane 6 today, and the ballistic missiles for the submarines. It is a reason why you have an admiral within this panel of aviators. And because we are working on ballistic missiles, that means the SWORD, we are also working for the breastplate, or if you prefer, the armor. And so we have a lot of competences on ground-to-space warfare, BMB, ballistic missile defense, space situation awareness, space traffic management, laser, etc. And so it is the reason why we work a lot also with the French Space Command. So we are clearly at the crossroad, the cross point of long-term requirements and short-term need. I take the example of the ballistic missile. Ballistic missile, they are constrained by their size until 2085 because the last submarine will be decommissioned in 2085 and the tube will stay the same. So we have to work on the third stage regularly to adapt the SWORD to the evolutions of the armors of the countries that you want to deter. And so that needs a lot of innovations, of course, because the world is changing very fast. And that is the reason why with the armed forces and the DGA, we have decided to have an incremental process. That means that every 10 years, we have a big changing of the third stage of the missile to adapt to the defense. For the civilian side, it is the same. It's nearly the same. The technologies are the same for the propulsion. A lot of technologies are very dual. And Ariane 6 is a rocket which is very well defined for the needs of today, especially the constellations. We can send up to 60 satellites by rocket, but this rocket has to face, as you mentioned, a new world. This new world is the world of the new space, especially with the importance of SpaceX by Elon Musk, and with a concurrence that we have not seen before. With Ariane 5, we had no concurrence. Now we have another world, and to be very honest with you, it's impossible to be competitive with in front of you a country, the United States, that supports SpaceX to be competitive, buying the flights twice the price by the DoD or the NASA to allow SpaceX to sell the flights on the commercial market at a very, very low price. And we are 13 in Europe to build Ariane 6 with a geographical return. So that's a cost. That's important to have a European launcher, but that's a cost. At the same time, SpaceX with the Falcon 9 is concentrated in California, in one area. And so what we have to do to survive in this context? Of course, we need innovations, but not only. I have 4 recommendations, which are both for the military side and the civilian side, which are, as you have understood, very well linked in the space domain. The first recommendation is we have to maintain investments on long-term developments. That means, for example, the propulsion, solid or liquid. That means the core technologies like carbon-carbon, like thermal protections, like ceramic material composite, like reusable engines, etc. Why? Because if you lose this base, it's impossible to have innovations. I think it's our core treasure. And for that, we need the help of the procurement agencies, because the programs have to be developed for 10 years, and sometimes you have a hole in between. And so if you have not research and development in between to maintain these competences, it will be impossible to restart. So first recommendation, maintain investments on long-term development. Second, in order to share the cost and to take advantage of the feedback of each branch, the civilian branch and the military branch, I think it's important to consolidate and support the companies like my company, but also Thales, Safran, Dassault, etc., which are dual, which have really dual technologies. You can't imagine, for example, for Ariane Group, for example, you can't imagine the number of dual technologies used for both civilian launchers and missiles, ballistic missiles, and also ground-to-space sensors. You can't imagine, a lot. And that's really a cross, I don't know if it is English, a cross-fertilization between each branch. And I think it's a very good incentive for innovation. We can use on Ariane 6 technologies coming from our missiles and the opposite. So, second point, continue to support the dual companies. That's very important. Third, I think it's important also to take into account the startups. The startups, they have their ideas. They are innovatives. They are more agile. But they are sometimes fragile. And so I think it is important to have, alongside each big company, an ecosystem of startups. Not to be eaten by these big companies, but to be supported by them. To have, alongside a big company, you know, an ecosystem of very innovative societies, companies. The fourth and last recommendation is to try to share the burden. Of course, it's lieu commun, as you mentioned, to share the burden, but to share the burden differently. I will be very frank. If we want to face concurrence tomorrow, I mean in the space domain is dual, but if you have not a civilian launcher to send your military satellites, you are not autonomous. So you need also to support the civilian launchers for that. And we have to build something which is more efficient, more flexible, more agile between us. And for that, we have to forget, it's difficult, I know, the futile competitions and nationalist temptations. To be very frank, try to have the best company in the best country to do a part of the rocket or of a missile, not to try to gain a new know-how from your counterpart. If you do that, you lose time, you lose money, and you are less flexible and more expensive. So, to conclude, I think we have no choice, or we have a choice, to die separately or to survive together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Admiral. And so I will turn last but certainly not least to Lieutenant General Marco Ovion. And so, General, you're the customer. You're not the end user, but you're the customer. You're between the end user and the industry. And we've just seen that there are such an evolution both in the needs, in their temporality, but also in the possibilities. How do you reconcile these different dynamics? Or what kind of governance can you put in place?
Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. Yes, as a result of this new context, we mentioned, of course, the acceleration of innovation cycle, but also the acceleration of the operational tempo and new threats. As you said, we need to adapt our procurement capability and develop our agility to deliver finally in due times in this acceleration tempo. So within 5 minutes, it's quite hard to sum up all the ideas, but let me focus on 3 basic principles we have to get in mind to improve this acquisition process and the management of armament programs. First things, we absolutely need to develop multidisciplinary teams. Just because the management of a program today encompasses more and more competencies, more and more activities such like technical architecture, technical expertise, of course innovation, the need to include civilian technologies, testing, procurement, quality, planning, finance, support, including, of course, training and education. We mentioned these points this morning. And, of course, all life cycle. So in that context, we need to develop our culture of teamwork. Something very important. It's really a topic of attention in complex organization. And in particular with the new generation of engineers and officers. So this teamworks need to be taken into account deeply. So in link in between DGA, the armed forces, and the industry. Second point, which is very important in my mind, is the need to implement top-level technical and contractual engineering methods. Here we are in the area of tools. We need to develop such tools in a collaborative approach, shared in between, here again, in between the DGA, the armed forces, and the industry, using digital tools and electronic processes which help and clarify the acceleration also of arbitration processes which are fundamental in the acquisition process. For instance, in 2 completely different areas, I would outline system engineering for complex programs, which are more and more helpful. Just taking the example of a collaborative combat system or air combat system, we need to certify some complex performance, including the airworthiness, and there is a need for traceability and certification. On the other hand, we also need to take into account the digital transformation, a new agile methodology for a digital project. Typically, I talk about agile method used for unclassified intranet renovation. We have started programs in 2 years ago to face the modernization of MOD intranet. So keywords are user-centric, data-driven, security in-depth, all that topics which are in link with cloud, cyber, big data challenges, or all these new areas which need adapted methodology, so adapted procurement. Concretely, we have created joint project team from build and run entities. We have negotiated agile ready contract for supplier procurement. We have also set up agile synchronized project, typically with 10-week increments. So it means scale agile framework for enterprise with safe methods. And also a global program increment review on business value with business owners. And all that taking into account a target continuous delivery of new features. So, as I said, we need to adapt these tools both for complex but also for this new digital project. Third main idea and basic principle is the need to better coordinate armament programs in order to simplify and accelerate capability development and deliveries. Here I mean, for instance, we need to be able to elaborate a comprehensive set of requirements, as it was said by General Adam. It is based on the outcome of joint analysis. We built what we called plateau, DGA, Armed Forces and Industry, and this lead to a shared set of requirements based on joint functional analysis. We also have to elaborate a single comprehensive document for test and evaluation because we have to bring a continuity in the expertise and in the trial in between DGA, Armed Forces and Industry in order to better mitigate the risk and the schedules. We have also put in place new transverse program in order to bring more technical coherence in between capabilities, in particular concerning end-to-end connectivity and cyber capability. And at least we try to boost the integration of technological breakthroughs, as mentioned by the round table, through both incremental approach and also scaling processes. Maybe we could have a focus on that if needed later on. Well, this new way of working is part of the transformation plan of the acquisition process of equipment of French MOD, launched 3 years ago, and also the funding of the French Defense Innovation Agency in 2019. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And so we have a little bit less than 10 minutes to take a few questions from the audience, and I've already a series of 3 questions that I will give you all 3 of them so that you can choose to answer. The first one is, what the value of man in crisis management with an ever more sophisticated and intelligent equipment? The second one is, what could the homogenization of fleets or of the specialization of countries could offer or prevent according to the types of missions? The third one is, how do you cooperate and share best practices amongst allies in terms of adaptation of defense procurement processes? And I believe that this one is particularly addressed to General Lavigne. And I would add maybe, because we already talked a little bit about it, and about the European cooperation. And we underline that it was complex, source of complexities, but it was necessary. And I would ask you, maybe just in a few words, to tell me what is the secret ingredient that is needed to make a cooperation that works when it comes to innovation. So I don't know, maybe let's begin by Major General Adam.
I'll have a quick go with all three questions if I can, but I'm sure that some of them have already been addressed during the first remarks. But yeah, the first is interesting, the place of man within crisis management and the place of man within all the technology. What we can see is we need this technological superiority. We need to maintain what we have if we have it. And certainly technology is the key of success, and we need some pretty efficient equipment, and we need performance in the weapons we use. But in the end, when everything goes down to the drain, when nothing works the way it was planned to work, the man is really the key factor, and the best armies are made of the best men, of course. So we need to educate our people, and we need to make sure they can make a decision. If you have no decision, the best weapon is useless. So yeah, when we see sometimes that a command and control system is the key to everything, I believe exactly the contrary. A good system is fine, it helps you a lot, but we need more good people than a good system, in fact. And the system now is a matter of implementing artificial intelligence in the vast quantities of data we can pool in a single areas on in our IT systems. The rest, yeah, the need and cooperation, that's the key ingredient to cooperation is probably the need, and make sure that we see the world through the same glasses and the same hole in the wall. But that's not something I have to say here, when I know that there have been a couple of discussions between clients, and we discuss about same need, just to make sure that our equipments evolve in the same direction, so that it's more efficient for the clients, the end user, but it's also easier to make sure that we're making the best of our investments within the industry.
Thank you so much, General. And I will ask you maybe to each of one pick and choose one of the questions you want to address, and indeed to have a 1 or 2 minute reply, so that we can stick to the timeline. Thank you.
Okay. Just to add one thing, I don't know if it is in the question, but something I wanted to add. I think that when we manage the armament program today, we have to take care that the time to the operation of the development of a new platform, for instance, an aircraft or a submarine, or I don't know what is the system we're speaking about, does not comply with the time frame of the development of the technology. So during the development of the new system, we have to take into account the fact that perhaps 2 or 3 generations of sensors are in front of us between the time we launch a new program and the time we are going to receive the new system in the forces. It is like if we bought a camera to Amazon, and if the forces will receive it 10 years later. So I think this is a major problem for us, a tier 1 company again, and I think this thing, perhaps you said that the software is decorrelated to the hardware, perhaps that this is a solution, but I think that there is not only the software, there are also the sensors, and don't forget that without the sensors, there is nothing.
Thank you so much.
I'll pick the first one. And I leverage on what General Adam just said. Place of man. Man must be above the systems anyway, even if the system becomes more and more complex. So our issue here is how man can delegate to the system, and the only way for that is he trusts the system. Right? So one of our big challenge, if it comes to artificial intelligence and all the like, is explainability, trustability. I will personally never delegate to my GPS in my car if I can't say, yeah, okay, you're right, I understand what you're doing. Okay, so it's not that I have to be even more and more clever than the system becomes, but I need to be able to understand. So I think the only way for that is, for us industry, it's stringent for us to develop the means to explain and see how things can be appropriated, but again and again have the operational forces in the loop so that in advance, upstream, they understand and appropriate the system, even to the point that they say, stop with this. Stop with this, it's too much, it's too far. We can't accept that.
Thank you, Admiral.
Just to say that during my previous life in the Navy, I was in 2006 in charge of the future systems for the Navy, alongside some friends maybe who are here. And at this time, it was very heavy to product something. Now I'm on the other side, in the industrial side, and I have seen a lot of improvements. Exactly what you mentioned. For the future, let's say, payloads of our missiles, we are around the table, the industry, the end user, the armed forces, and the DGA. And it's working very well. And we gain a lot of time. I think now we have no choice. We have to do that more and more to be sure that the cost will be available, that the price will be available, that the need is a real need of the armed forces, and the industry is able to fulfill the requirement. And so I think in the new world, I think if we do not do that, we are lost.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to come back on the European cooperation, or I would say more largely on cooperation and the link with procurement. As it was said, I really think that we need to share, of course, a vision of the future with our strategic partners. Depends, of course, on the area. And this has to be done up to the level of quite accurate requirement at the end, because till we haven't shared these common requirements, it's very hard to foresee concrete cooperation, in particular in between industrials. And the second aspect of the cooperation is the way we need to build the European industrial basis in an efficient way. So we need to find such an efficient way which allow a competitive process, but also the vision of state. And I think that today we, within the European community, we have found such a balanced way in between the PESCO process, in which you build a common comprehensive view of the future, of the requirements, but also with the Fed approach. I think we have found a mixed balance process for this two type of approach, top-down and a bottom-up approach.
Thank you so much, and I would like to thank you once again for having offered us some clarity on a very complex topic in a very limited timeline. I know that 1 hour is very ambitious when you have 5 valuable speakers as you are, and so I would like to thank you very much for having taken part in this panel and for having offered us some clarity once again of this very complex issue. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and thank you all.
So thank you, Doctor, and thank you for this rich panel, as was already underlined. It's now time to take a break. I will request you to be back in your seats at 13:40 like yesterday for the 7th roundtable, for the keynote address from Air Commodore Professor Franz Husinger. Thank you.